My mother demands I give both my kidneys to my golden child brother. My mother called me selfish for refusing to give both my kidneys to my brother Tyler. She stood in my living room, crying fake tears, saying I was killing him by keeping organs I didn't deserve. You have 2 healthy kidneys, and Tyler has none. You could save him today if you weren't so heartless. Tyler destroyed his kidneys drinking a bottle of vodka every day for 15 years. Started at 16, never stopped. Mom bought him his first bottle, said boys needed to learn to handle liquor. When doctors warned him at 25 that his kidneys were failing, Mom said they were being dramatic. When he needed his first dialysis at 30, she blamed the doctors for not trying harder. Now at 32, both kidneys were dead. He needed a transplant or he'd die within a year. Mom's kidney wasn't a match. Dad's wasn't either. But mine were perfect. 1 kidney, I told her the first time she asked. I'll give him 1. 1 isn't enough, she said. His body is weak. He needs both to have a real chance. Then I'd need dialysis forever. I'm 28. That's 50 years of machines keeping me alive. You're stronger than Tyler. You could handle it. This was classic Mom. Tyler was her golden boy since birth. He got a car at 16. I got nothing. He got college paid for but dropped out. I got student loans. He got bailed out of jail 3 times. I got kicked out at 18 for getting pregnant. That pregnancy ended in miscarriage, but Mom said I deserved it for being irresponsible. I became a nurse anyway. Worked 3 jobs to pay for school. Built a life without any help from the family that forgot I existed until they needed something. For 10 years, Mom never called. Neither did Tyler. I found out about family events through Facebook. Wasn't invited to Tyler's wedding, Mom's 60th birthday, or Dad's retirement party. But now they needed my organs, so suddenly I was family again. The harassment started after I said no. Mom called my work, told them I was having a mental breakdown. Called my landlord, said I was unstable. Called my boyfriend, told him I was a murderer who would let my own brother die. She showed up at my hospital during my shift. Everyone, look at the nurse who won't save her brother's life. She has 2 kidneys and won't share. Security escorted her out, but she came back the next day, and the next. For 3 weeks, she stalked me, calling, texting, showing up everywhere. Tyler's dying because of you. You're selfish. What kind of sister watches her brother die? What she didn't know was that Tyler wasn't dying. Not really. He was on dialysis 3 times a week. Uncomfortable, but manageable. Could live for decades like that. I knew because I worked in the dialysis unit. Saw patients in their 70s who'd been on machines for 20 years. Tyler just didn't want the inconvenience. Neither did Mom. She wanted her perfect son back, not one attached to machines. So she decided I should be the one attached to machines instead. I finally called Tyler directly. Hadn't spoken to him in 2 years. Do you know Mom's demanding both kidneys? I asked. Yeah, he said. So I'd be on dialysis forever. You understand that, right? You're younger. You'd adapt better. Plus, you don't have kids to worry about. Neither do you. But I might someday. You already tried and couldn't. He actually said that. Referenced my miscarriage like it was proof I didn't deserve working organs. That's when I decided to end this completely. I scheduled a meeting with Tyler's transplant team. Told them about Mom's pressure. Showed them her texts demanding both kidneys. The lead surgeon's face went dark. She wants you to donate both? That's not even legal. We'd never approve that. Turns out Mom had been telling Tyler the team would do it if I agreed. Complete lie. The surgeon called Mom and Tyler immediately. I put the phone on speaker so Rosa could talk to both of us at once. Mom's voice came through sharp and angry, demanding to know why Rosa was interfering in family business. Rosa stayed calm and explained that federal law prohibited living donors from giving both kidneys because it would require the donor to need dialysis for life. Mom's voice went up an octave, insisting Rosa was lying to protect the hospital from some imaginary lawsuit. I watched Rosa's face stay perfectly professional, while Mom accused her of being bought off by insurance companies. Rosa repeated the facts slowly, like she was talking to a confused patient instead of a screaming woman. Living donors can only give 1 kidney. This is federal law. The transplant team would never approve a double donation even if I begged them to do it. Mom started crying then. Those same fake tears she used when she wanted something. But underneath the performance, I heard real panic creeping in. Her whole strategy just fell apart in front of a doctor who couldn't be bullied or manipulated. Rosa kept explaining in that patient voice that Tyler's body didn't need both kidneys to survive. That 1 healthy kidney from a living donor would work fine. That Mom had been given false information about the medical requirements. Mom's crying got louder and she hung up before Rosa finished talking. Rosa looked at me across her desk and apologized for my mother's behavior. She said the transplant team wanted to document everything that happened in case my family tried to pressure me again later. They were putting a flag on my file, so nobody could even discuss donation with me unless the whole team was present. Rosa pulled out some forms and started writing notes while I sat there feeling this weird calm wash over me. For 3 weeks, Mom made me feel like a monster for saying no. She convinced Tyler I was killing him on purpose. She told Dad and probably half the family that I was selfish and cruel. But now a doctor with 20 years of experience just confirmed that what Mom wanted was literally illegal. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't heartless. I was just refusing to do something that no hospital in America would allow. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in weeks. The professional validation felt like someone lifted a weight off my chest that I'd been carrying. So long I forgot it was there. Evan was waiting at my apartment with Chinese takeout spread across the coffee table. He stood up when I walked in, and I told him what happened with Rosa and the phone call. He hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe for a second, and that's when I started crying. Not sad crying, just this release of all the tension I'd been holding. Evan didn't say anything, just held me while I cried into his shoulder and got tears all over his shirt. We ate the Chinese food after I calmed down, and he kept reaching over to squeeze my hand like he needed to make sure I was really okay. That night, my phone started blowing up around 11. Text after text from Mom, each one angrier than the last. She called me a liar who turned the doctors against her, said I poisoned them against Tyler with fake stories, accused me of wanting my brother dead so I could have Mom and Dad's attention, threatened to make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. The messages kept coming, sometimes 3 or 4 in a row, jumping from rage to guilt trips and back again. She said Tyler was crying because of me, said Dad was disappointed in the daughter I became, said I'd regret this when Tyler died and it was all my fault. Evan took my phone and started screenshotting every message. He created a folder on my laptop labeled harassment documentation and saved each screenshot with the date and time. My hands shook while I watched him work. Reading Mom's words in those screenshots made them feel more real somehow, seeing the pattern laid out in a grid of images. Evan reminded me that her behavior was proving exactly why I was right to say no. A mother who really cared about both her kids wouldn't demand one sacrifice her health for the other. A mother who loved me wouldn't send messages like these. The next morning I got to work early, and Catalina called me into her office before my shift started. She closed the door and told me hospital security reported my mother tried to enter the dialysis unit last night around 9. Mom told the security guard she needed to educate the staff about family loyalty and medical ethics. The guard recognized her from the previous incidents and refused to let her pass the lobby. Mom argued for 20 minutes before finally leaving. Catalina showed me the security report on her computer screen, and I felt sick reading it. Catalina assured me the hospital takes staff safety seriously. They were putting a flag in the security system, so if my mother tried to enter the building, security would get an immediate alert. She asked if I was okay and whether I needed any changes to my schedule. I almost cried again just from someone being kind about this whole mess. Catalina said to let her know if I needed anything and reminded me the Employee Assistance Program offered free counseling sessions. I thanked her and headed to the dialysis unit to start my shift. Working surrounded by my regular patients felt normal in a way nothing else did lately. Mr. Klein showed me photos of his new granddaughter on his phone while his machine hummed next to him. Mrs. Brennan complained about her daughter-in-law's cooking and made plans to host Thanksgiving anyway. James talked about the fishing trip he was planning for next month. These people had been on dialysis for 15-20 years. They lived full lives, had families, made plans, complained about normal things. Tyler's situation wasn't the death sentence Mom claimed it was. He just didn't want the inconvenience of dialysis 3 times a week. During my lunch break, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice asked if this was me, and when I said yes, she introduced herself as Lorenza, Mom's sister. I hadn't talked to Lorenza in 8 years, not since before I got kicked out. She said she heard about the kidney situation from Mom and wanted to hear my side of the story. Her voice sounded genuinely concerned instead of accusatory, which surprised me enough that I agreed to talk. I told Lorenza everything while sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot. Started with Mom showing up 3 weeks ago demanding both kidneys. Went through the harassment at work and home, explained how the surgeon exposed Mom's lies about the transplant team approving a double donation. Lorenza stayed quiet the whole time, just listening, and when I finished there was this long pause where I could hear her breathing on the other end. She finally said she wasn't surprised Mom lied about what the doctors told her. That hit different from I expected, hearing someone from the family actually say it out loud. Lorenza started talking about watching Mom enable Tyler's drinking since he was 16. She remembered Mom buying him that first bottle, remembered family dinners where Mom laughed off concerns about how much Tyler drank. She said she always knew it would end badly, but nobody could tell Mom anything when it came to Tyler. Then Lorenza admitted something that made my chest tight. She said the family excluded me because Mom made it too uncomfortable to maintain contact with me. If anyone asked about me or suggested inviting me to something, Mom would get upset and make the whole event miserable. Eventually, people stopped asking because it was easier to go along with Mom than deal with her drama. Lorenza's voice got quiet when she said she was ashamed she went along with it for the sake of peace. We talked for almost an hour sitting in our separate locations. Lorenza told me about family gatherings I'd missed, how Mom controlled the guest lists and the conversations. She said several family members were uncomfortable with Mom's current behavior, the harassment and the kidney demands, but they were all afraid to speak up. Mom had this way of punishing anyone who disagreed with her, freezing them out or causing problems until they backed down. Lorenza promised to run interference if she could, maybe talk to some of the other relatives who were questioning things. Before we hung up, she told me I was right to protect myself, and that what Mom was asking was wrong. Hearing those words from actual family, not just Evan or my coworkers, Felt like something inside me unlocked. First family validation I'd had in 10 years. That evening, I was making dinner with Evan when my phone rang from the building's front desk. The doorman said my mother was in the lobby asking to come up. My stomach dropped and I told him I didn't want visitors, asked him to have her leave. I could hear Mom's voice in the background getting louder, something about her rights as a mother and needing to see her daughter. The doorman stayed professional, told her the resident didn't want visitors and she needed to leave the building. Mom started shouting loud enough that I could hear her clearly through the phone. She was yelling about how I was killing Tyler, how the building staff was helping me commit murder by keeping her away. Evan took the phone from my shaking hand and suggested we call the police non-emergency line to document what was happening. I'd never called the police on my own mother before and it felt huge and scary, but Evan pulled up the number and dialed. We explained the situation to the dispatcher, gave them the address, said we needed to document ongoing harassment. An officer showed up about an hour later when Mom was already gone. He was maybe 40, tired looking, and he sat in our living room taking notes while I explained the pattern. The workplace stalking, the calls to my landlord and boyfriend, tonight's incident at the building. He wrote everything down in this small notebook, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he said this kind of behavior often escalates and suggested I consider getting a restraining order if it continued. He made it sound so normal, so straightforward, like this was just a thing that happened and there were procedures for it. After the officer left, Evan and I spent the evening on his laptop researching restraining orders. We found the court forms, read through the requirements, started making a list of every incident we could remember from the past 3 weeks. Evan opened a spreadsheet and we filled in dates, times, locations, what Mom said or did each time, the hospital incidents, the texts, the calls to my work and landlord, tonight's scene in my building lobby. Seeing it all laid out like that, row after row of harassment, made something click in my head. This wasn't complicated family drama like I'd been telling myself. This was a clear pattern of someone refusing to accept no and using intimidation to try to force compliance. The officer's matter-of-fact treatment of the situation helped me see it that way. He didn't act like I was overreacting or being dramatic. He treated it like what it was, harassment that needed documentation and legal intervention. 2 days later, I finished my shift and headed to the parking garage. Mom was standing next to my car. She looked terrible, hair messy, clothes wrinkled, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in days. I froze about 20 feet away, keys in my hand, trying to decide if I should turn around and get security. But Mom saw me and started talking fast. This desperate stream of words about Tyler being her baby and how she couldn't lose him. She said she knew I was angry about the past, but Tyler didn't deserve to suffer for family problems. Her voice kept breaking and she was crying real tears this time, not the fake ones from before. I stayed where I was, not moving closer, and told her calmly that Tyler wasn't dying. He was on dialysis 3 times a week and he could live for decades like that. I saw patients do it all the time in my unit. Mom's face twisted and she started screaming that I was heartless for comparing her son to strangers. She yelled that dialysis was torture, that I was sentencing Tyler to a miserable existence when I could save him with one simple choice. Her voice echoed off the concrete walls of the garage. I pointed out that I'd already offered 1 kidney, that 1 kidney would help Tyler, but she rejected that option. I said it clearly, that she wanted me on dialysis instead of Tyler. Mom actually nodded and said yes, that's exactly what a real sister would do. Sacrifice herself completely for her brother, who never did anything to deserve this situation. She said Tyler was the victim here, that his drinking wasn't his fault because I didn't understand addiction, and that I was being selfish by putting my own health above his life. Security guard Bo came around the corner right then. Someone must have reported the shouting because he walked straight toward us looking alert and focused. He recognized Mom immediately from the hospital alert system, said her name and told her she needed to leave hospital property right now. Mom tried to argue, said she was just talking to her daughter, but Bo cut her off. He said she was trespassing on the hospital property, and if she didn't leave immediately, he would call the police. His voice was firm and professional. Not mean, but absolutely clear that he wasn't negotiating. Mom looked at me one more time with this expression like I'd betrayed her, then turned and walked toward the garage exit. Bo stayed with me until she was gone, then walked me to my car and watched me get in and lock the doors. He asked if I was okay and told me to call security if I saw her anywhere on the hospital grounds again. I thanked him and sat in my car for a few minutes after he left, hands still shaking on the steering wheel. Mom turned and walked toward the garage exit, her shoes clicking hard against the concrete floor. She stopped about 10 feet away and spun back around, her face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this when Tyler dies and it's all your fault," she screamed, her voice bouncing off the walls. "When he's gone, you'll have to live with knowing you could have saved him but chose yourself instead." Bo stepped between us, his body blocking her view of me. He didn't say anything, just stood there solid and calm until Mom finally turned and left for real this time. I heard her car start somewhere on the lower level, the engine noise fading as she drove away. Bo walked me to my car and waited while I unlocked the door and got in. "You should think about changing up your schedule if you can," he said through the open window. "Come and go at different times, use different entrances, that kind of thing." His words made something click in my head. This wasn't just awkward family drama anymore. Hospital security was worried enough about my safety to suggest I change my daily routine. I thanked him and locked my doors, then sat there for a minute letting that sink in. My own mother had become enough of a threat that trained security personnel thought I needed to take precautions. I drove home on autopilot, my hands tight on the steering wheel. When I got to my apartment, Evan was already there making dinner. He took one look at my face and asked what happened. I told him about Mom in the parking garage and what Bo said about varying my schedule. Evan stopped chopping vegetables and pulled out his phone. "I found a lawyer," he said. "Alberto Campos. He does family law and harassment cases. I called him this afternoon after you texted about your mom showing up again." I felt this wave of relief that I wasn't handling this alone anymore. Evan had already researched lawyers and made calls while I was at work. He showed me Alberto's website with all his information about restraining orders and family court cases. I called the number right then, standing in our kitchen while Evan finished making dinner. Alberto answered on the third ring, and his voice was professional, but not cold. I explained the basic situation: Mom demanding both kidneys, the harassment at work, tonight's scene in the parking garage. He listened without interrupting, then said he could meet with me tomorrow afternoon if I was available. He asked me to bring all my paperwork, the texts from Mom, the hospital incident reports, the police report from when she showed up at my building. "Bring anything that shows a pattern of behavior," he said. "We need to document everything." The next day, I left work early and drove to Alberto's office in a building downtown. His waiting room was small but clean, with normal office furniture and magazines on the coffee table. A secretary checked me in, and 10 minutes later, Alberto came out to get me. He was maybe 50, wearing a suit but no tie, and he shook my hand firmly before leading me back to his office. I sat across from his desk and pulled out the folder Evan and I had put together. All the screenshots of Mom's texts organized by date, the hospital security reports from each time she showed up, the police report from my apartment building, the statement from the transplant surgeon about the illegal double kidney request. Alberto spread everything out on his desk and went through it piece by piece, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. I walked him through the whole story from Mom's first demand through last night in the parking garage. He asked questions about specific dates and times, about witnesses, about whether Mom had ever been physically violent. I told him no physical violence, but lots of screaming and showing up places she shouldn't be. When I finished, Alberto leaned back in his chair and looked at all the papers covering his desk. "You have a strong case for a restraining order," he said. "The pattern is clear. You have multiple witnesses, and the workplace disruption is well documented." He explained that harassment doesn't have to be physical threats, that stalking and repeated unwanted contact counts too. Hearing a lawyer say I had a strong case made something loosen in my chest. I wasn't overreacting. This was real enough that the legal system would take it seriously. Alberto explained the whole process step by step. We'd file a petition for a restraining order with the court, which would trigger a hearing date in about 2 weeks. At the hearing, I'd need to testify about Mom's behavior and present all this documentation. He'd help me prepare my testimony and make sure everything was organized properly for the judge. "Given what you've shown me, I'm confident the judge will grant the order," Alberto said. "You have hospital security involved, police reports, workplace complaints, and a clear pattern of escalating behavior." He explained that the restraining order would legally prohibit Mom from contacting me, coming to my work or home, or posting about me on social media. If she violated it, she could be arrested. The order would last for 1 year initially, and we could renew it if needed. Alberto's confidence helped calm the nervous feeling in my stomach. This was the right step. I wasn't being dramatic or cruel. I was protecting myself from someone who refused to respect basic boundaries. We scheduled another meeting for next week to prepare for the hearing, and I left his office feeling like I'd finally taken real action instead of just reacting to whatever Mom did next. That night, I was heating up leftovers when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" Dad's voice came through the line, tired and rough. "It's me." I froze with the microwave door still open. Dad hadn't called me in 10 years. Not once since the day Mom kicked me out. "Mom told me what happened at the hospital," he said. "I know she's been out of line, but I'm calling to ask you to please reconsider, for Tyler's sake. The family is falling apart over this." I closed the microwave and leaned against the counter, my free hand gripping the edge hard enough to hurt. "Where were you when Mom kicked me out at 18? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Where were you when I miscarried alone? When I worked 3 jobs to get through nursing school?" The line went quiet for a long time. I could hear Dad breathing on the other end. Could picture him in the house I grew up in, probably sitting in his recliner avoiding Mom's eyes. "I should have stood up for you back then," he finally said. "I know I should have. But can't you let the past go now when Tyler's life is at stake?" I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Tyler's life isn't at stake, Dad. He's on dialysis 3 times a week. He can live for years like that, maybe decades. I see patients do it all the time in my unit." Dad made a noise like he was confused. "But your mother said the transplant team told her both kidneys would give Tyler the best chance. That 1 kidney might not be enough." "Mom lied," I said flatly. "The transplant surgeon called her and told her that double kidney donation is illegal. It's not even medically possible. The hospital would never approve it no matter what I agreed to." The silence on Dad's end was different now, heavier. She told me the doctors said that, he said slowly. She showed me paperwork and everything. I felt a weird mix of anger and pity. Dad had been manipulated too. Mom had controlled what information he got, just like she tried to control everything else. She lied to you, Dad. She lied to Tyler. She lied to the whole family about what the doctors actually said. Dad didn't say anything for almost a minute. I heard him shifting around, maybe standing up or pacing. I didn't question it, he finally admitted. I don't understand all the medical stuff, so I just trusted your mother to handle the details. That's when I realized Mom had been playing everyone. Tyler thought the transplant team had approved taking both my kidneys if I agreed. Dad thought the doctors recommended it for Tyler's best chance. The whole family probably believed Mom's version where I was the selfish villain refusing to save my dying brother. Nobody had checked her story because nobody thought she'd lie about something this serious. Tyler isn't dying, I said again. Dialysis is uncomfortable, but it works. He could live a completely normal lifespan on it. And even if he does get a transplant, it only needs to be one kidney. That's all anyone ever gets from a living donor. Mom made up the part about needing both. I explained how the transplant process actually works. How one healthy kidney from a living donor is usually better than two from a deceased donor because it's fresher. I told him about my patients who'd been on dialysis since the 90s, who had jobs and families and full lives. Dad listened without interrupting, and I could almost hear him processing information that contradicted everything Mom had told him. His voice sounded older than I remembered, worn down by years of letting Mom make all the decisions. I need to figure out what's true. He hung up without saying goodbye, and I stood in my kitchen holding my phone and feeling strange. Dad had actually listened. He hadn't yelled or accused me or tried to guilt-trip me into changing my mind. He'd heard the truth and admitted he needed to think about it. I didn't know if that meant anything long-term. Dad had spent decades going along with whatever Mom wanted, taking the path of least resistance even when it meant abandoning his daughter. One phone call didn't erase 10 years of silence. But maybe it was something. Maybe Dad was finally starting to see through Mom's manipulation. Or maybe he'd decide it was easier to believe her version, and I'd never hear from him again. I put my phone down and finished heating up dinner, trying not to hope too hard that my father might actually choose me for once. The next week, I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor of the medical building where the hospital's employee assistance program had their offices. Catalina had given me the name of a therapist, Michaela Fields, who worked with healthcare workers dealing with family stress. I'd been skeptical about therapy, figured it would just be someone telling me to forgive my mother and repair the relationship. But Catalina promised Michaela was different, that she actually understood difficult family situations and wouldn't push reconciliation. The waiting room was quiet with soft chairs and calm colors on the walls. I filled out intake paperwork asking about my family history and current stressors, checking boxes that didn't come close to explaining the actual situation. When Michaela came out to get me, she was younger than I expected, maybe 40, wearing regular clothes instead of professional office wear. Her handshake was warm, and she smiled like she was genuinely glad to meet me. Her office had a couch and 2 chairs, windows looking out at the parking lot, and a bookshelf full of psychology texts mixed with novels. I sat in one of the chairs, and Michaela sat across from me with a notepad. Catalina told me a little about your situation, she said. But I'd like to hear it from you. What brought you here? I started talking, and once I started, I couldn't stop. The whole story came pouring out. Mom's demand for both kidneys, Tyler's entitlement, the 10 years of estrangement, the harassment campaign, last week's parking garage scene. Michaela listened without interrupting, nodding sometimes, taking occasional notes, but mostly just paying attention. When I finished, she didn't immediately try to fix anything or offer advice. She just said this one thing that made me feel like she actually understood. It sounds like your mother has never seen you as a separate person with your own needs and rights. You've always existed in her mind as either an extension of her or a resource for your brother. Nobody had ever put it that clearly before. That's exactly what it felt like. I kept coming back to that phrase for the rest of the week, turning it over in my mind during shifts at work and while lying awake at night. Mom had never seen me as separate from her plans and needs. I existed as either a tool for her use or an obstacle to remove when I didn't cooperate. Michaela asked me to think about other times this pattern showed up, and once I started looking, I saw it everywhere. When I was 12 and wanted to quit piano lessons because I hated them, Mom made me continue for 3 more years because she liked telling people her daughter played piano. When I wanted to go to community college close to home, she pushed me toward expensive universities so she could brag about where I got was accepted, then refused to help pay when I actually enrolled. When I got pregnant at 18, she kicked me out not because she was disappointed, but because having a teenage mother as a daughter didn't fit the image she wanted to project. The miscarriage that followed wasn't a tragedy to her. It was a convenient problem solving itself. Michaela helped me see that Mom's current demand for both kidneys followed the exact same pattern. She wanted Tyler healthy and normal again, and my body was just another resource she expected to access without my consent. The fact that taking both kidneys would destroy my health didn't register because my needs had never registered. I was supposed to exist for her convenience, and anything else was selfish rebellion. Understanding the pattern didn't make it hurt less, but it made me feel less crazy for refusing. I wasn't being cruel or heartless like Mom claimed. I was finally treating myself like a person with rights, instead of an extension of her will. My second therapy session with Michaela happened the following week, and she started by asking about the miscarriage. I hadn't talked about it in years, not really. Evan knew it happened, but I'd never gone into details. The pregnancy had been unplanned, the result of a relationship with a guy from my high school who disappeared the moment I told him. I was 18, living at home, working part-time at a grocery store and trying to figure out college. Mom's reaction was immediate rage. She screamed that I was ruining her reputation, that people would think she raised me wrong, that I was throwing my life away. Dad said nothing, just sat there looking at the floor while she yelled. 2 days later, Mom told me to pack my things and get out. She didn't care where I went or how I'd manage. I moved into a friend's basement and worked double shifts to pay rent. At 12 weeks, I started cramping at work. By the time I got to the emergency room, I was bleeding heavily. The doctor told me the pregnancy wasn't viable and I needed a procedure to complete the miscarriage. I went through it alone because I didn't have anyone to call. When I finally reached out to Mom 3 days later, thinking maybe this would soften her, she told me it was probably for the best since I clearly wasn't responsible enough to be a mother anyway. She said the miscarriage was proof that even my body knew I wasn't ready, like it was some kind of judgment on my character. Then she hung up and didn't speak to me again for 10 years. Telling Michaela all of this, I realized how much shame I'd been carrying that was never mine. I'd blamed myself for getting pregnant, for not being more careful, for somehow causing the miscarriage through stress, or not taking good enough care of myself. But I was 18, and alone, and terrified, abandoned by everyone who should have helped me. The miscarriage wasn't my fault. Mom's cruelty wasn't something I earned through irresponsibility. I'd been carrying guilt for a decade that belonged to the people who failed me, not to my own choices. After starting therapy, I started sleeping through the night for the first time in weeks. The constant anxiety that had been sitting in my chest loosened enough that I could take full breaths again. Evan noticed the change immediately. He said I seemed less jumpy, that I didn't flinch anymore when my phone buzzed with notifications. We were having dinner at his apartment when he brought it up, and the conversation shifted into something bigger. He told me he was serious about us, about building a real future together. He'd been thinking about asking me to move in even before the kidney situation started, but he didn't want me to think he was only offering because I needed help. He wanted me to know that my family's dysfunction didn't scare him away. He'd seen the worst of it now, witnessed Mom's harassment and Tyler's cruelty, and he was still here. He was still choosing me. We talked for hours that night about what we wanted. He wanted marriage eventually, kids maybe, a life that looked nothing like the chaos I grew up in. I wanted the same things, but I'd been afraid to hope for them after everything that happened when I was 18. Evan held my hand across the table and promised me that I deserved good things, that I deserved people who stayed. I cried a little bit, the good kind of crying that comes from relief instead of pain. For the first time in months, I felt like something in my life was moving in the right direction. The restraining order hearing arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in late October. I met Alberto outside the courthouse at 8:30, my hands shaking as I held the folder of documentation we'd prepared. He walked me through what would happen, how the judge would hear testimony from both sides, how I needed to stay calm and factual no matter what Mom or her lawyer said. We pushed through the heavy courthouse doors and went through security, then found the correct courtroom on the 3rd floor. Mom was already there with her lawyer, sitting on a bench in the hallway. She looked put together and sympathetic, wearing a nice dress and minimal makeup, her hair styled carefully. She'd clearly prepared to look like a concerned mother rather than a harasser. Her lawyer was an older man in an expensive suit, and they were talking quietly with their heads close together. When Mom saw me, her face crumpled into sadness, like I was the one hurting her. I looked away and focused on Alberto's calm presence beside me. He squeezed my shoulder and reminded me that we had strong documentation and the truth on our side. But looking at Mom sitting there looking so normal and maternal, I worried the judge would see her performance instead of the reality. I worried that all my evidence would look like a vindictive daughter exaggerating family conflict instead of a harassment victim protecting herself. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wooden benches and a raised platform where the judge would sit. Alberto and I took our seats at one table while Mom and her lawyer sat at another. A clerk called the case and the judge entered, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. She reviewed the paperwork quickly, then asked me to testify first. I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs and swore to tell the truth. Alberto guided me through my testimony with careful questions. I described the initial kidney demand, Mom's insistence on both kidneys despite medical impossibility, my refusal, and the harassment that followed. I talked about the calls to my workplace claiming I was having a breakdown, the calls to my landlord saying I was unstable, the calls to Evan telling him I was a murderer. I described Mom showing up at the hospital during my shifts, her public scene in the lobby, security having to escort her out repeatedly. I talked about finding her waiting by my car in the parking garage, her refusal to leave when asked, the security guard who had to intervene. Alberto presented each piece of documentation systematically. Screenshots of text messages, call logs showing the frequency of contact, written statements from the hospital security documenting the trespassing incidents, the police report from when Mom showed up at my apartment building. I watched the judge's expression shift from neutral interest to concerned focus as the pattern became clear. She started taking notes, asking clarifying questions about dates and specific incidents. When Alberto presented the statement from the transplant surgeon explaining that double kidney donation was illegal and that Mom had lied about the medical team's willingness to perform it, the judge's face hardened into something cold. Mom's lawyer stood up to cross-examine me, his voice smooth and sympathetic. He suggested I was exaggerating normal family conflict into harassment, that my mother was simply a desperate woman trying to save her son's life through any means possible. He implied I was being vindictive over old family issues, using the current crisis to punish my mother for past disagreements. He asked if it was true that I'd been estranged from my family for 10 years, if I'd refused to attend family events, if I had a history of conflict with my mother. I answered honestly that yes, we'd been estranged because Mom kicked me out at 18 and never tried to reconcile. Yes, I wasn't invited to family events. Not that I refused to attend. Yes, we had conflict, mostly around her treatment of me versus my brother. The lawyer tried to make it sound like I was the problem, the difficult daughter who caused family drama. But when Alberto stood up for redirect, he asked me one simple question. Did I offer to donate one kidney to my brother, the legal and medically appropriate option? I said yes, I offered one kidney. Alberto asked what my mother's response was. I said she told me one wasn't enough, that I needed to give both and go on dialysis myself. The judge's expression made it clear that answer landed exactly as Alberto intended. Then the judge asked Mom directly if she demanded both my kidneys knowing it was illegal and would leave me on dialysis for the rest of my life. Mom's lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off and repeated the question, her voice sharp. Mom shifted in her seat, her careful composure cracking. She said the doctors were wrong, that she'd only been exploring all options to save her son, that any mother would do the same. She insisted she never meant to hurt me. She just wanted Tyler to have the best possible chance. But her voice wavered and her eyes darted around the courtroom, and it was obvious she was lying. The judge's face stayed hard and unimpressed. She asked if Mom understood that harassing me at my workplace could cost me my job. Mom said she was just trying to make me understand how serious the situation was. The judge asked if showing up at my home after being told to stay away seemed like reasonable behavior. Mom's face flushed and she started crying, but they were different tears than usual. These were real tears of panic as she realized her manipulation wasn't working on someone who had actual authority. The judge granted the restraining order for 1 year. She stated clearly that Mom was prohibited from contacting me directly or through third parties, from coming to my workplace or home, from posting about me on social media, or making any public statements about me. She said any violation would result in immediate arrest and potential jail time. Mom's face crumpled completely and she started crying harder, reaching for her lawyer's arm like she needed physical support. Her lawyer tried to argue for a shorter duration or less restrictive terms, but the judge was unmoved. She said the documented pattern of harassment was serious and persistent, that I had a right to feel safe at work and home, and that Mom's behavior had crossed clear legal boundaries regardless of her claimed motivations. The gavel came down with a sharp crack and it was over. I had legal protection. Mom couldn't contact me anymore without facing criminal consequences. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt relief and sadness mixing together in my chest until I couldn't tell which emotion was stronger. Alberto was satisfied with the outcome, saying it was exactly what we hoped for. Evan was waiting outside and hugged me tight, telling me I did great, that it was over now. But standing there on the courthouse steps with the restraining order paperwork in my hands, all I could think was that I just got a court order against my own mother. I protected myself legally, and I knew it was necessary, but that didn't make it feel good. It felt heavy and sad, and like something permanent had broken, that could never be fixed. My mother would never change. She would never apologize or see me as a person instead of a resource. The restraining order made that reality official and final. Evan took me out to dinner that night to celebrate, choosing a nice restaurant downtown with good wine and dim lighting. He kept trying to make me smile, talking about how brave I was and how proud he was of me for standing up for myself. I appreciated what he was trying to do, but mostly I just felt exhausted. The adrenaline from the hearing had worn off and left me hollow and tired. I picked at my food and drank my wine and tried to feel happy about having legal protection, but I couldn't get there. Evan noticed and stopped pushing. He reached across the table and held my hand and told me it was okay to not be okay, that I didn't have to pretend everything was fine just because I won in court. He understood that protecting yourself from family doesn't feel like victory. It feels like loss. We finished dinner quietly and went back to his apartment where I fell asleep on his couch before 9 o'clock, too tired to even make it to the bedroom. 2 days after the courthouse hearing, Lorenza called while I was getting ready for my shift. Her voice sounded strained but determined when she told me Dad had confronted Mom about the lies. Apparently he'd asked to see the medical records himself and discovered everything Mom had been telling the family was wrong. The transplant team never said both kidneys would give Tyler a better chance. The doctors never told Mom that one kidney wouldn't be enough. She'd invented all of it to manipulate everyone into pressuring me. Dad was furious when he realized the truth, and according to Lorenza, they'd had the biggest fight of their marriage. He packed a bag that same night and showed up at Lorenza's house asking if he could stay in her guest room while he figured things out. Lorenza said she'd never seen him so angry or so defeated at the same time, like he was finally seeing 30 years of marriage clearly for the first time and hating what he saw. She told me several family members had been calling her asking what really happened because Mom's version of events kept changing and nothing made sense anymore. People were starting to question things. My cousin wanted to know why I really got kicked out at 18. An uncle was asking about the miscarriage and whether Mom had actually been supportive like she claimed. Lorenza said the narrative Mom controlled for so long was finally cracking, and family members were reaching out to each other trying to piece together the truth. I listened to all this while buttoning my scrubs and felt something strange in my chest. Not quite relief, not quite sadness, just the odd sensation of watching something inevitable finally happen. That afternoon between patients, I checked my phone and found a Facebook message from my cousin Jenny. We'd been close as kids, spent summers together before the family split happened. Her message was long and awkward, full of apologies for believing Mom's stories about me being unstable and selfish. She wrote that she'd always felt uncomfortable about how Mom talked about me, but didn't know how to push back without causing family drama. She said she was sorry for not reaching out sooner and asked if maybe we could meet for coffee sometime. No pressure. She understood if I said no. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back that, yes, I'd like that. We made plans for the following week at a coffee shop near the hospital. The next morning, Catalina called me into her office before rounds. I thought maybe there was a problem with one of my patients, but she smiled when I sat down and told me the hospital administration wanted to recognize how I'd handled the situation with Mom. They were giving me a commendation for maintaining patient care standards during a difficult personal time. Catalina said she'd written a letter to the board explaining how I'd never let the harassment affect my work, how I'd continued providing excellent care even when Mom was showing up at the hospital causing scenes. The commendation would go in my personnel file and come with a small bonus. I thanked her, but honestly didn't know how to feel about it. Getting recognized for surviving my mother's harassment felt weird and validating at the same time. The coffee meeting with Jenny happened on my day off. I got there early and sat by the window watching people walk past, nervous in a way I hadn't expected. When Jenny arrived, she looked different from the Facebook photos. Older, obviously, but also tired, like life had worn her down some. We hugged awkwardly and ordered drinks and then sat across from each other, not quite knowing how to start. Jenny jumped in first, apologizing again for the years of exclusion. She told me she'd always questioned Mom's version of events, but it was easier to go along than to make waves. The family gatherings I wasn't invited to, she'd asked about me a few times, but Mom would get upset and Dad would change the subject, and eventually Jenny stopped asking. She said she felt guilty about that now, about choosing comfort over doing the right thing. We talked for 2 hours, catching up on lost years, and it felt good, even though it was sad too. All that time we could have known each other but didn't, because Mom controlled the narrative and everyone let her. Before Jenny left, she told me Tyler was angry about the restraining order. He was blaming me for tearing the family apart, telling anyone who would listen that I was vindictive and cruel. He was still going to dialysis 3 times a week and complaining constantly about how unfair his life was. Jenny said he'd been posting on Facebook about ungrateful siblings who abandon family in their time of need. Obvious subtweets about me even though he couldn't name me directly because of the restraining order. But medically he was fine. Stable. Not in immediate danger. Just inconvenienced and angry that his little sister wouldn't sacrifice herself to make his life easier. Jenny said it plainly without trying to soften it, and I appreciated her honesty. She also told me the transplant team was actively searching for donors through the National Registry. Tyler might get matched with a deceased donor within the next year, maybe sooner depending on how the list moved. This confirmed what I already knew professionally from working in the transplant field, but hearing it from Jenny made it more real somehow. Tyler would probably get his kidney eventually. Just not from me. Not at the cost of my own health and future. That week in therapy, Michaela and I worked on processing the complicated feelings about protecting myself while watching family relationships break apart. I told her about Dad staying with Lorenza, about Jenny reaching out, about the weird mix of relief and guilt I felt about all of it. Michaela helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for fixing dysfunction I didn't create, that Mom's lies and manipulation had been destroying the family long before I set boundaries, that healing doesn't require reconciliation with people who hurt you. Sometimes healing means accepting that some relationships are too damaged to repair, and that's okay. You can move forward anyway. You can build a life without needing their approval or forgiveness. She asked if I felt guilty about the restraining order, and I admitted yes, sometimes. Michaela nodded and said that was normal, but reminded me that guilt doesn't mean I made the wrong choice. It just means I'm human, and family relationships are complicated even when they're unhealthy. 3 weeks after the courthouse hearing, Alberto called to tell me Dad had reached out asking if I'd be willing to meet with him alone. Just the 2 of us. No Mom, no Tyler. Alberto said I didn't have to agree to anything, but if I wanted to meet, he advised doing it in a public place. Reminded me I could leave any time if I felt uncomfortable or unsafe. I thought about it for a day before telling Alberto yes, I'd meet Dad. We arranged it for the following Saturday at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us had history. Saturday morning I got there 15 minutes early and sat at a corner table where I could see the door. My stomach felt tight and my hands were cold despite the warm coffee cup I was holding. Dad walked in exactly on time, looking older than I remembered. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, shoulders slumped like he was carrying weight he couldn't put down. He saw me and walked over slowly, sitting down across from me without trying to hug or touch me. We looked at each other for a long moment before he started talking. He apologized for not protecting me when I was younger, said he chose peace over standing up for what was right, and he was ashamed of that now. He admitted he believed Mom's lies about the kidney situation because he didn't understand medical stuff and trusted her to handle the details. He said he was sorry for the decade of silence, for not reaching out after I got kicked out, for not being there when I miscarried, for missing 10 years of my life because it was easier than confronting Mom. I listened to his words settle into the space between us, watched him stare at his coffee cup like it might give him answers he didn't have. The apology felt real in a way that hurt more than if it had been fake, because it meant he knew what he'd done and chose it anyway for 10 years. He waited for me to say something, to tell him it was okay or that I forgave him, but I couldn't make those words come out. Forgiveness felt too big, too permanent for this moment when everything was still raw and broken. I took a breath and told him the truth, that words were easy, and he'd had a decade to reach out before Tyler needed a kidney. He flinched but didn't argue, just nodded and kept his eyes down. I said I was willing to try rebuilding something if he was serious about change, not just guilty right now, but actually committed to being different. We could meet once a month, have coffee, see if trust could grow back slowly over time. He looked up then, something like relief crossing his face, and agreed immediately. We picked the third Saturday of each month, same coffee shop, same time, a structure that felt manageable and safe. That evening, Evan and I sat on my couch scrolling through apartment listings on his laptop, the glow of the screen lighting up his face as he clicked through photos of empty rooms. We'd been talking about moving in together for a few weeks, testing the idea carefully, but tonight it felt real and possible instead of scary. He showed me a 2-bedroom with big windows, and I leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, thinking about how different this was from my family. With Evan, I got to choose, got to build something new instead of trying to fix something that was broken from the start. He asked if I wanted the place with the windows, and I said yes. Let's go look at it this weekend. The idea of having a home that was ours, not mine or his, but ours together, felt important in a way I couldn't quite explain. It was choosing the family I wanted instead of being stuck with the one I was born into. Evan saved the listing and kissed the top of my head, and I felt something settle in my chest that might have been hope. At my next therapy session 3 days later, I told Michaela about Dad's apology and our monthly coffee plan. She listened with that focused attention she always gave, then pointed out how much had changed in just 2 months since I first called the transplant team. I'd set boundaries with Mom, gotten legal protection through the restraining order, started rebuilding relationships with Dad and other family members, and now I was planning a future with someone who actually supported me. Michaela said I'd grown from someone panicked and defensive into someone who protected herself while staying open to healthy connections. I hadn't thought about it that way. Hadn't noticed the changes happening because I was too busy just surviving each day. But sitting there in her office with the afternoon light coming through the blinds, I realized she was right. 2 months ago, I was terrified and alone, and now I had Evan and Alberto and Catalina and even Dad trying to be better. Not everything was fixed, probably never would be, but I wasn't drowning anymore. The following week, Lorenza called to invite me to a small family dinner at her house. She said she was inviting Dad, my cousin, and a few other relatives who wanted to reconnect with me. Mom and Tyler wouldn't be there, she promised, and I could leave anytime if it felt wrong. I almost said no because family gatherings had been painful for so long, but something about Lorenza's voice made me think maybe this could be different. I agreed, and she sounded genuinely happy, telling me to come Saturday at 6 and not to bring anything except myself. When I arrived that Saturday, the house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic, and Lorenza hugged me at the door like I was someone precious she hadn't seen in years. Dad was already there sitting in the living room looking nervous, and my cousin came over immediately to hug me too. There were 6 of us total, relatives I barely remembered but who remembered me, and it was awkward at first with everyone being too polite and careful. But then Lorenza served dinner and people started talking, and slowly the stiffness melted into something that felt almost normal. During the meal, my aunt told a story about a Christmas when I was 12, and Mom made me sit at the kids' table while Tyler sat with the adults even though we were only 4 years apart. She said she remembered feeling uncomfortable about it but stayed quiet because confronting Mom always caused huge fights. My cousin admitted she saw Mom give Tyler money for college while telling me I needed to figure it out myself, and she'd felt sick about it but didn't know what to say. One by one, people shared moments they'd witnessed Mom treating me unfairly, times they knew it was wrong but chose peace over speaking up. Each story landed heavy in my chest, this proof that I hadn't imagined it or been too sensitive like Mom always said. Other people saw it too, saw the unfairness and the cruelty, and chose to look away because it was easier. Part of me wanted to be angry at them for their silence, for all the years they could have said something and didn't. But mostly I just felt sad for the kid I used to be, trying so hard to be good enough while everyone watched and said nothing. I thanked them for their honesty now, even though it came too late to change anything. Near the end of dinner, my cousin mentioned casually that Tyler had finally gotten matched with a deceased donor and was scheduled for transplant surgery in 3 weeks. The words hit me strange. this mix of relief and something else I couldn't name. Relief because he'd get the kidney he needed without it coming from me, without me having to sacrifice my health or my future. Relief because maybe this would finally end the crisis that had taken over my life for months. But also this hollow feeling knowing our relationship was damaged beyond repair, that even getting what he wanted wouldn't change how he'd treated me. I told my cousin I hoped the transplant went well, and I meant it. Because whatever else was true, I didn't want Tyler to die or suffer. I just didn't want to be the one who had to save him at the cost of myself. Dad reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, a small gesture that felt bigger than it was. The next week at work, Catalina called me into her office and told me the hospital administration was developing new protocols for handling family harassment of staff members. She said my case had shown them gaps in their protection systems, and they were creating better procedures partly because of what I'd gone through. The hospital would now have clearer policies about banning family members from premises, faster response systems for staff reporting harassment, and mandatory documentation requirements when relatives became threatening. Catalina said my experience was going to help protect other healthcare workers who might face similar situations, and that mattered. I sat there absorbing this information, thinking about how something good might actually come from all the awful stuff with Mom. Maybe another nurse wouldn't have to deal with their mother stalking them at work, or maybe security would respond faster, or maybe someone would get help before things got as bad as they did for me. It didn't fix what happened, but it gave the whole mess some kind of meaning. 3 weeks later, Lorenza called to tell me Tyler's transplant surgery had happened that morning and gone well. The new kidney was working properly, filtering his blood like it should, and the doctor said he'd be off dialysis completely within a few months once he finished recovering. He'd need anti-rejection medication for the rest of his life, but that was manageable, normal for transplant patients. I felt this wave of relief hearing the surgery succeeded, because despite everything, I didn't actually want my brother to die. I wanted him to live and be healthy, just not at the cost of my own health. Lorenza said Tyler was already complaining about the hospital food and the uncomfortable bed, which sounded exactly like him. She didn't suggest I visit, and I didn't offer, both of us understanding that some relationships were too broken to fix even when the medical crisis resolved. Dad called me that evening to tell me he'd visited Tyler at the hospital, but Mom had been there too, so he'd kept the visit short. He said he was maintaining the separation even though Mom kept calling him crying and begging him to come home. I asked if he was okay, and he said yes, that staying at Lorenza's house was giving him space to think clearly for the first time in years. He realized how much of his life he'd spent managing Mom's emotions and enabling her worst behaviors, and he couldn't go back to that even though it was hard and lonely sometimes. I told him I was proud of him for holding his boundary, and he got quiet, then said that meant more than I probably knew. We talked for a while about nothing important, just normal conversation about his day and mine, and it felt like maybe we were building something real between us after all these years of nothing. Evan and I signed the lease on a 2-bedroom apartment across town, far enough from my old place that it felt like a real escape. The walls were plain white when we moved in, boring and neutral like every rental apartment I'd ever seen. We spent the first weekend painting the bedroom a soft blue I picked from a dozen color samples, and Evan chose gray for the living room because he said it would make the space feel bigger. We arranged furniture in ways that made sense for how we actually lived, instead of how someone else thought we should live. The couch went under the window so we could look outside while watching TV, and we put the kitchen table near the balcony door where morning light came in. Every choice felt intentional and ours, not something inherited or forced on us by family expectations or toxic history. I hung photos of me and Evan on the walls, pictures from trips we'd taken and dinners we'd shared, creating a visual story of the life we were building together. No family photos went up, no pictures of people who'd spent years pretending I didn't exist. This apartment was genuinely ours, a space where nobody could show up demanding things or making me feel guilty for protecting myself. 3 months passed after the restraining order, and I realized one morning that I'd slept through the entire night without waking up anxious. My work performance reviews were strong, with Catalina noting that I'd maintained excellent patient care even during personal stress. Evan and I fell into comfortable routines together, cooking dinner most nights and talking about our days without the constant shadow of family drama hanging over everything. I started reconnecting with cousins and extended family members who reached out after learning the truth about what Mom had demanded. We met for coffee or lunch, awkward at first, but gradually becoming easier as we built new relationships based on honesty instead of Mom's carefully controlled narrative. My cousin invited me to her daughter's birthday party, the first family event I'd attended in over a decade. I brought a gift and stayed for 2 hours, talking with relatives who apologized for believing Mom's lies and excluding me for so long. The conversations felt genuine, people actually listening when I spoke instead of waiting for their turn to talk. I wasn't holding my breath waiting for the next crisis or harassment incident, and that calm felt strange after months of constant vigilance. Dad and I met for coffee on the first Saturday of every month, sitting at the same cafe downtown where we could talk without interruption. He showed up on time every month, which might sound basic but felt significant, given his history of choosing Mom's comfort over my well-being. He told me he'd started therapy to work on codependency issues, learning to recognize how he'd enabled Mom's worst behaviors for decades. We talked about real things during these coffee meetings, not surface-level small talk, but actual conversations about his regrets and my experiences. He admitted he should have protected me when I was younger, should have stood up to Mom when she kicked me out, should have reached out during the 10 years of silence. I didn't forgive him completely because words were easier than changed behavior, but I appreciated his honesty and his consistent effort. Our relationship would never be what it could have been if he'd been a better father from the start, but it was becoming something real and honest instead of the fantasy relationship I'd wished for as a kid. He asked about my life with genuine interest, remembered details from previous conversations, and respected my boundaries when I said I didn't want to discuss Mom or Tyler. The monthly coffee meetings felt like building something new from scratch, rather than trying to fix something that had always been broken. I sat in the apartment Evan and I created together, looking at the blue bedroom walls and the photos of our life on display, and realized something had shifted inside me. I didn't need Mom's approval to know I'd made the right choice protecting my health and refusing an illegal demand. I didn't need Tyler's gratitude or acknowledgement that his expectations had been completely unreasonable. I'd built a support system with Evan, Catalina, Michaela, Alberto, and family members who respected my boundaries and treated me like a person instead of a resource. I'd established legal protection through the restraining order and documented everything carefully in case Mom tried anything else. I'd created a life where I was valued and respected, where my needs mattered and my voice was heard. Some family relationships ended permanently, and I was genuinely okay with that, because those relationships had been toxic and one-sided from the beginning. Other relationships transformed into something healthier, built on honesty and mutual respect instead of obligation and guilt. Dad was trying to change, and I was giving him space to prove his commitment was real. Extended family members were reaching out and rebuilding connections they'd let Mom destroy. I finally chose myself after spending 28 years trying to earn approval from people who would never give it, and that choice felt right in a way nothing else ever had.